Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the issue of tiger conservation. India has registered biggest margin of drop in tiger numbers in a decade in the year 2021. 127 big cats have fallen prey to everything from poachers and accidents to natural causes with man-animal conflict last year. India is home to one-third of a global tiger population, and the country's success in saving the big cat is crucial to global efforts to protect their numbers. India was the first country, in fact, in the world to champion the cause of conservation of tigers and its natural habitats. Project Tiger, launched in 1973, was one of the largest conservation initiatives of this kind globally. At present, India has around 75% of tiger population and its source areas amongst the 13 tiger-rich countries in the world. 2.24% of the country's geographical area is spread out in 51 tiger reserves in 18 states. In today's episode, we will discuss various issues related to tiger conservation, such as habitat and loss of prey species, hunting, poaching, illegal trade, conflicts with humans, and effect of climate change as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we have with us Dr. S.P. Yadav. He is ADGF, Project Tiger, and Member Secretary of the National Tiger Conservation Authority in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. We're also joined by Ashwika Kapoor, a science communicator and filmmaker, and Mr. Ashok Pai is also joining us, a former Principal Chief Conservator of Forests in Uttarakhand. Welcome, all of you, to Sansad Television. Let me begin with you, Dr. Yadav, and let's start by understanding those numbers which I was quoting earlier. 127 tiger deaths in 2021, highest in a decade. Reasons behind it and what does it indicate?
Vishalji, you are very right. National Tiger Conservation Authority records every tiger mortality happening in the country. In fact, we consider every tiger death as a poaching unless proven otherwise. If it is poaching, it has to be brought to a logical conclusion. That is, you have to submit a charge sheet in the court and court of law. And if it is natural death, then it has to be proven. So we are very particular about tiger death. You are very right. 127 deaths have been reported, but it has to be seen in proportion to the population. Let me tell you, people normally think that tiger is immortal, but average life of a tiger in the wild is only 10 to 12 years. In captivity, there are reports that they survive 15 to 20 years, but in wild, they survive only 10 to 12 years. Poaching is definitely a biggest cause of concern. If tiger death is happening due to poaching, it's a serious concern. But if it is taking place because of the natural causes, like internecine fights, you know, in the wild, how tiger has survived for such a long period is survival of the fittest, Darwinism theory. The natural ecosystem does not allow survival of the weaker individuals in the system.
Indeed.
So that's why this natural fight, internecine fights, territorial fights between the tigers, it's a natural, but the ecosystem remains healthy. So the causes of death are several, like poaching, revenge killing, poisoning, electrocution, snaring, road and rail hits. But I would say that the 127 number, if you see to the total proportion of total tiger population, which is around 3,000 in the country, it is, one can say that it's not alarming and it is under control.
Okay. Okay.
So this is my take on the numbers of tiger death.
Okay, we'll go into the reasons behind these deaths as well and try and understand you know, what actually is happening on the ground. Let me bring in Mr. Pai as well. Mr. Pai, do you agree with what Dr. Yadav is saying, that proportionately, if you look at these figures, then these might not be that high, though the number still is the highest ever deaths recorded in a decade?
Let's try and understand it in a slightly different perspective as well. We have about 2.4% of the geographical area under the tiger reserves or the protected areas. And to my understanding and knowledge, more than 50% of the tigers, they live outside these protected areas because of the limitation of space available in these critical core habitat of the tiger reserves of the protected area, so to say. Now, these tigers are not as intensively managed as the ones which are there in the protected areas of national parks and sanctuaries. And their chance of coming in conflict with the human beings and becoming prey to the poachers are pretty high. If I have seen these figures closely, perhaps about 65 tigers which have died of 127, they were killed or died outside the protected areas or the core habitat of the tigers. So that is an important perspective to remember, because that brings in the issue of the territorial or the minimum territory which is required for
that number which you're pointing out, Mr. Pai, is around 50%, 65 out of 127.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So this is again you have to see in the context of the minimum area which is required in different habitats for each of the tiger. Female on an average in the central India requires about 15 to 20 square kilometers, and male tiger would require about 100 square kilometers during the winters, and it goes up to almost 200, 300 square kilometers during the summers when the prey or the herbivores spread out, and that becomes then a challenge for their protection and management. So this has to be seen in this context, and one of the major issues is that availability of the protected areas to sustain the kind of population which we have today in the country. So from that point of view, it is not an alarming situation, so to say, but it's a matter of concern, and it is more so is happening because of the fragmentation of the habitats, which is a challenge for the managers of the tiger or any wildlife in our country. Given the population pressure on the population pressure and the competing demand for the land, for the linear infrastructure projects, the grazing demands of the local cattle, etc., etc. In addition to the mining dam and the roads or network.
Those are really important aspects there, Mr. Pai, and very important point which you made in terms of ensuring that natural habitat of tigers is preserved. They're given more space with the increasing numbers. Ashwika, you heard both the gentlemen there, and both of them experts vis-a-vis tiger conservation. The key issue here so far in the discussion which has come out, and obviously there are other factors as well, seems to be minimizing the man-animal conflict, and that can be further achieved by ensuring that the natural habitat of tigers is preserved or is increased with the increasing number of tigers in the country.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing at the moment, the number of tiger conflicts and deaths as a result of it, is actually, ironically, sort of a result of successful conservation. Because the way we've successfully managed tiger conservation in this country over the last decade and more, that actually means that those really protected tiger reserves and the national parks where the tigers are spilling out because they are prolific breeders. So they don't know where the borders are. So they are spilling out. So actually what we are seeing right now is a result, ironically, of successful conservation. And to me, I think, summing up everything that Mr. Yadav as well as Mr. Pai just said, for me, actually, I think the crux and the biggest challenge is connecting these islands of tiger reserves and creating those corridors, because that habitat fragmentation, if that can be addressed, then I think that's basically the greatest challenge and the solution that has to be addressed, because numbers will go up. Our tiger conservation is actually way too good. So numbers will go up. And as numbers go up, there is going to be more problems. So looking forward, it actually becomes more and more difficult for conservationists and the Forest Department and scientists to manage the tiger population in the country.
Dr. Yadav, do you agree with this point there that addressing the issue of habitat fragmentation is the biggest challenge right now. And you know, the numbers are increasing, as you were also earlier pointing out. If we have to look at these deaths, which are the highest in a decade, then proportionately, that might not be that big a number. But when we are looking at the reasons or the causes or the challenges, then you know, there's this habitat fragmentation, and also thereby preventing the man-animal conflict is the biggest challenge.
Vishalji, first I would like to address Paiser's remark. Not 60%, but 30% tigers are outside our protected area as per 2018 estimation. And very true, these tigers are more vulnerable. They are in conflict with the in human-dominated landscape, so they enter into conflict. And the protection aspect outside tiger reserves, that's definitely not as good as in tiger reserves. In fact, I say that there are two types of tigers in the country. One is above poverty line, another is below poverty line. So above poverty line is those tigers which are in tiger reserves, where we give a lot of funding support and a lot of management intervention is there. The below poverty line tigers are those who are outside protected areas, where they are in just territorial forest and they are more vulnerable. So that's very good point. And in fact, the National Tiger Conservation Authority is giving due emphasis. We are mapping all tiger habitat in the country so that management interventions, projected protection regime can be improved in that area. As far as point of Ashwika, the corridor connectivity, that's really important and it's very valid. In fact, our tiger conservation, India's national tiger conservation policy depends, it's basically based on core, buffer and corridor. These three aspects of tiger management. And not now, in fact, right from 2014, we do all India tiger estimation once in 4 years. 2014, we identified corridors across the country. 2018, again, we revalidated the corridors. Now there are 32 major tiger corridors in the country. And you know, there is a tiger conservation plan for each tiger reserve. It's mandatory, it's a statutory requirement. And each tiger conservation plan comprises a prescription for the core area, buffer area, as well as corridor. But definitely the protection status in corridor, because it's not under control of forest department or tiger reserve management, they are private lands, revenue lands, there are villages. So protection level is definitely low in that. But very rightly said, tigers cannot survive in islands of protected areas. They need connectivity.
Okay,
So
indeed.
Again, we the All India Tiger estimation is right now due in 2022, is already ongoing. We are again trying to map corridors across the country. And recently, we have taken a decision that for corridor management, because it's very, very important, we will consult with the stakeholders, the state governments, and trying to concretize what actions we need to be taken for corridor protection and management.
Okay, Mr. Pai, you know, let's look at another aspect, and I'd like to start with you. It's obviously we have you know, talked about the habitat fragmentation, the need for connectivity between these corridors, and preventing man-animal conflict as well. But another big challenge which is coming up is the effects of climate change. In fact, the WWF study points out that by 2070, if no mitigating steps are taken, then the entire Sundarbans Tiger Reserve might go underwater.
The challenges of climate change are immense, and perhaps we are not as equipped as we need to be. It's not just for the Sundarbans. It's not just for the Sundarbans alone that this challenge is there, and it would be valid for the central Indian area, where water is going to be a major source crisis for not only wildlife, or perhaps it could be a challenge for the human beings also, availability of the fresh water or the groundwater. So the mitigation measures which are controllable or well within the domain of the Indian state, and to some extent is being addressed, but the larger issues are beyond the ministry or the Indian context.
Okay.
In that way, what I really appreciate was the last meeting of the Tiger Conservation Authority, which was held, started a very innovative process of mapping the water bodies along with the tiger reserves. That is the water atlas, which is overlapping over the tiger reserves and the protected areas.
Okay.
That is going to be immensely help the management of wildlife, as well as preserving the helping us address the water crisis in our country, especially the drinking water issue. It is very well documented fact that the most of the watersheds in our country, they lie in the forested areas or the protected areas. And if I remember correctly, about 35 rivers in our country, they originate from these 51 tiger reserves. So that shows the significance or importance of the protection of these natural resources or the forest and the protected bodies, protected areas. To keep the integrity of these ecosystems intact, is going to be the next challenge, and perhaps when you are preserving the tiger, you are not just preserving the apex species alone. You are protecting the habitat and the very precious water bodies and the entire ecosystem per se, and help in addressing these issues.
Indeed.
I am not sure how the increase in temperature by 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees is going to impact Sundarbans, but it will be, if it is going to merge many of these vulnerable areas and create a crisis for the habitat of the Sundarban tigers. And some of the India being one of the leaders in the climate mitigation from the perspective of addressing the emission issues or the energy production point of view, it has taken a lead wherein we have perhaps able to meet more than what we had promised in terms of renewable energy, as well as adding the green cover, so to say. And to that extent, India is doing its bit and taking the lead.
Indeed.
But as I said, that the climate change issue or the crisis is beyond our the political borders of the country.
Indeed, and this is a particular challenge, Mr. Pai, which you're clearly pointing out. The climate change is a challenge, is a battle which has to be fought on several fronts. Something which is being done, and India is again taking a pole position there as well. But Ashwika, coming back to you again, your views on this challenge being posed by the effects of climate change vis-a-vis the tiger conservation efforts.
I think when it comes to climate change, tiger is just one of many things that are going to get affected. The climate change crisis is obviously going to affect all of biodiversity and humanity, because once a habitat is lost, that's not just a matter of a flagship species getting lost, but an entire region getting affected that lies beyond it. Taking the Sundarbans, for example. And if we do get to that point where the Sundarbans sinks, which is looking more and more likely every day, every single scientific projection is saying that it's going underwater. And because I live in that region, it's that much more alarming for me. It's obviously something that needs to be prioritized hugely. The problem is it's just such an enormous problem that we don't actually end up sort of looking at the larger picture and addressing all the things that need to be fixed to address it. But absolutely, I think, again, there's going to be, as climate change progresses, and this is not just for tigers, but all other species and human beings, you're going to see migrations, you're going to see movements, you're going to see animals trying to adapt to that change. And coming back to the fact that where there's no connectivity and there's sort of like a cliff edge, it's almost like a cliff edge for them. This is where the wild ends, this is where the urban, this is where human beings live.
Indeed.
So as soon as there's that cliff edge, that is majorly problematic. So even addressing climate change, I again come back to the fact that habitat is going to be the biggest problem.
The
That
connectivity of corridors
habitat,
is
that
something which
ability to
becomes
move.
really significant there, as you're pointing out earlier, Ashwika. Dr. Yadav, I'd like to come to you for a concluding comment on this aspect, because we would need to understand as to what is it that the Conservation Authority is doing, and how big is the challenge, do you believe, the effects of climate change are? Because that, again, takes us back to the basic fundamentals of tiger conservation, that is, addressing the issue of habitat fragmentation or the corridor connectivity, as well as Ashwika is pointing out.
Vishalji, it's definitely a huge challenge, the climate change, because it's impacting entire ecosystem. As Mr. Pai pointed out, yesterday the authority has released the water atlas map in tiger reserves, and more than 350 sweetwater streams, either they originate or they have their catchment, large area of their catchment in tiger reserves. So for water security of the country, you must save the tiger and tiger's habitat. Climate change is definitely impacting tiger conservation, like drought has increased, fire incidences this year have been very high in certain part of the country. And these all climate change are impacting the habitat, like invasive alien species like lantana camera and all such kind of hardy species. Their area is increasing. So definitely there is a challenge, but we are gearing up. Like we have mapped all our water bodies. We'll give emphasis on protection and conservation of wetlands and rivers and nalas, which are originating in tiger reserve. And now there's another phenomena. The tigers are moving up. Now there are high altitude tigers because of change in vegetation. These tigers are, so we are also monitoring the high altitude tigers in the higher reaches of hills in India. And simultaneously, we are also in collaboration with Nepal, Bhutan, to see how the tigers are moving up. So again, it's a large phenomena which will not only affect tiger reserves, as Ashwika pointed out, it's impacting entire ecosystem, all species. So, but again, we are trying to see that what best we can do for tiger conservation. Like I said, wetland conservation, river conservation. In tiger reserves, we are giving emphasis. And again, we do independent management effectiveness evaluation of tiger reserves once in 4 years. This year, again, we are going to do it in 2022. And there will be a separate criteria to assess the climate change mitigation preparedness of each tiger reserve. So we'll come out with an assessment that how the tigers are ready to face this kind of challenge.
Okay, that seems to be a pretty holistic plan out there. Thank you so much, Dr. S.P. Yadav, Mr. Ashok Pai, and Ashwika as well for joining us and sharing your views and thoughts on this important issue, that is tiger conservation. And those are the challenges which we discussed, and the steps being taken to address those challenges to ensure that tigers do have a safe place to reside, and all aspects are tackled effectively in due course of time as well. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.